Hello, everyone, and welcome to our virtual field trip. My name is Teresa Haggerty, and I'm a board member at the Washington's National Park Fund, and I will be your host today. And it is my honor and privilege, and I'm so excited to kick off our virtual field trips for 2023. I know that we've got plenty of new audience members with us today, so I want to take a quick moment to share who Washington's National Park Fund is. WNPF is the official philanthropic partner for Mount Rainier, North Cascades, and Olympic National Parks. We are incredibly fortunate to work closely with the parks and park superintendents as we work to fund 30 to 40 priority projects each year. Through all of this work, our vision is to see that our parks are strong and vibrant, youthful, and everlasting. Now, before we start on our virtual field trip today, there are a few housekeeping items to cover. This trip is 45 minutes long with a 30-minute presentation from our speaker and a Q&A session at the end. During our field trip, feel free to enter any questions that come to your mind in the box as we go. And we also have closed captioning enabled, which you can access at the bottom of your screen. As always, we welcome any feedback as we work to make these trips as accessible as possible. All right, with that, we are ready to board the virtual bus to North Cascades National Park. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Dr. Jason Ransom, who leads the wildlife program at North Cascades National Park Complex. He's also an adjunct faculty at Washington State University and mentors graduate students working in North Cascades and other national parks. Dr. Ransom serves on the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Species Survival Commission, and North Cascades. Jason's currently leading research and conservation projects on land birds, Clark's nutcrackers, marmots and pikas, alpine carnivores, and grizzly bear restoration, as well as fishers. Jason, we are so excited to be with you today and learn more about your work in the North Cascades. With that, take it away.
Thanks for having me. This is going to be fun. So we are going to talk about grizzly bears, but I want to talk about wildlife restoration in general because there's a bigger picture behind the whole thing. Let me just make sure. Are you seeing the slides okay?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So before I get started, I really want to talk about the ecosystem as a whole, because the park is just that dark little green wedge in the middle, and it's sort of the heart or the core of this ecosystem. But we really think about so many wildlife issues and conservation issues at an ecosystem scale. So we can't really operate as an island. It's not effective. But that 13,500 square mile ecosystem is an important place for a lot of species. So it's all collaborative, both across the international boundary as well as all the administrative boundaries. And we work with lots of partners to make things happen. So we do look at ecosystem scale, but we also focus a lot on science-based decision-making and really trying to use hard data and hard science to drive management. And that management has to be really nimble and flexible because we don't know what climate is going to throw at us or any other pressure is going to throw at the ecosystem. And then really a big piece of our program at North Cascades is about coexistence because we're also part of this ecosystem. And I like to think of us as humans as part of this ecosystem. And so we've got to figure out how do we find that balance when we're all out there hiking and recreating and enjoying this place, so that we're not actually, causing impairment to species that live there. There's a way to coexist, and so we try to find that balance as we work through all the questions and problems and challenges that we face. So the park itself, that little heart of the ecosystem, is quite biodiverse. There's actually probably quite a few more vascular plants and non-vascular plants than you see on the screen there. But we are fortunate to have most of the species that we think or know lived in this ecosystem sort of pre-European arrival. There's certainly some losses, and that's what I'm going to talk about. But we're fortunate here that we still have some of those members of the animal kingdom that have disappeared, and even in Mount Rainier or Olympic. So North Cascades is a little bit wild and a little bit resilient because of it. And so here's our missing mammal list. We've got they're on their way back list, which is wolves, lynx, wolverine, and fisher. And then we've got the extirpated list, we don't think they're here anymore. Cascade Red Fox, we'll talk about briefly, big mystery. The northern bog lemming is kind of new on our radar. It's not something that people have really looked for very hard, and they're also not very easy to find. So we don't know if they're still here or not. We think they probably are in very low numbers. And then grizzly bear, we'll talk extensively about, are probably not here anymore. Certainly not functionally here. There may be the occasional bear, but nobody's reproducing. And so when you ask why some of these animals have disappeared, these numbers are fairly staggering. So this is the records from the Hudson Bay Company of animal hides, individual animals that were shipped from around this ecosystem. So some were, we don't know where they were killed exactly. Some were certainly in the middle of the ecosystem. Some could have been a little bit away from it, but from the forts that were shipping furs, this is more than 50,000 carnivores in 30 years, which is just staggering. The fact that anything still exists is a testament to the resilience of nature. But when we look at these, and I just can't wrap my brain around 15,000 wolves in the northwest corner of this country, that were here, and then now they're not, or even wolverines. 1,200 wolverines is a lot. Right now we don't know if there's even 40 in the state. So these are big numbers, and North Cascades was fortunate to actually still kind of hold on a little bit. And what we're seeing now, it's pretty amazing. This little graph on the screen just shows the percent of all the observations we've had since 1995 to 2020. So, pretty big span. And you see this big jump at the end of the curve there. Some of that is absolutely advances in technology. We've got more trail cameras than ever out on the landscape, things like that. The effort is certainly increased, but we know some of that change is real. Fishers were flatlined until we physically put them back in North Cascades in 2018, and you see a big spike. Detections of lynx have gone up. Some of that's probably detection bias. We know wolves are making their way back, and we're getting more wolverine detections than we've ever gotten in North Cascades. So I'm going to walk through those all briefly as we work our way toward the active restoration. But it's some pretty interesting observations, and it's encouraging to see that nature can find a way back. This ecosystem is fortunate to be a huge wilderness area. There's one highway through the middle of the park, but otherwise it's largely roadless. It's 97% public land. The entire ecosystem is. So there's habitat, there's room, as long as we give them a chance, they can eke their way back. So just jumping right in real quick with lynx. So you'll see these maps for the species I'll show you here. The hollow black cells in the map are places where we've had some kind of survey effort. So some of those are camera stations. Some of those are genetic, like samples where we've done the carnivore samples and genotyped them to find out who it was and what they ate. So each species has different types of surveys, but those are places we've looked. And then the highlighted cells are places that we actually found them. And so that's the southern third of the park has actually been pretty good for lynx, as well as the east side of Ross Lake there. And so that's encouraging. And the westernmost detection of lynx in the state is here in the park. Lynx are still struggling. They're not by any means out of the woods, which is no pun intended, but that was a good one. So we're keeping an eye on them. There's certainly reintroduction efforts in central Washington for lynx, trying to bolster their populations. There's concerns about genetic viability, all those questions. But at least tentatively, lynx are doing okay in the park. When we look at wolverines, same map, you can see all the places we've looked, and you see a bunch of green there that's not in a surveyed cell. So those are either observations that were confirmed, visitors saw an animal, took a picture, we know it was a wolverine, or in this case, we had 11 individuals from a wolverine study that were radio collared, and so we know that they walked all over the place, and then we found out where that was. So again, the southern third of the park, pretty active wolverine. There's even some cells there that aren't lit up that are recent such as Diablo this winter. There was a Wolverine down there. So we know they're out there. We're seeing more than ever. We don't know abundance or reproduction or all those things we'd love to know about the secret lives of Wolverines, but it's encouraging that we're seeing them making their way back. Wolves, big topic in the state. You can see a surprising number of detections in the park. Wolves have occasionally shown up in the park over the decades. The single animal traversing the landscape pops up, but we haven't had pack formation in most of the recorded part of the park history. But now we're seeing a lot more activity, and we're seeing them in places we haven't seen them before, which is exciting. There are a couple trail cam photos there that are great. One from Horseshoe Basin up near Cascade Pass, one near South Pass as well. And just to get to the really fun news, so some of you might remember this, our first established pack that we knew about on the west side of the slope, the Dobson pack, over near Baker River area, Marble Mount. This is the two of them on a trail camera up Baker River in the park. That's when she rolled over and made sure that we knew there was a female with the radio collared male. Since then, the male has disappeared, but we're still seeing wolf activity. And so we hope and think other wolves have shown up and they're still making a go of it. But stay tuned. We're going to find out, I hope, with trail cameras that are out there ticking right now. But perhaps the more exciting news is the pack that we've had active in the southern part of the park for the last several years. This is a picture of 5 of the 6 of them. They had 4 pups that we know about in 2020. Really exciting. This is right on the PCT, which lots of hikers would probably love to know about. I have heard them on the PCT out there. So they are around, they're doing their thing. We suspect they may have had pups actually in 2019 as well, just because we got some young wolves on camera that dispersed from somewhere that were still hanging out together, which is kind of an indicator they probably came from the same pack and it probably wasn't a long way away. So we suspect they're still out there, they're doing their thing. Keeping our eyes on them, certainly monitoring what's going on, but it's a really exciting development to see wolves naturally coming back into the North Cascades. Cascade Red Fox, there's a whole lot of empty cells on that map. And then the one cell that's green is just the happenstance that Forest Service caught in 2001. And we don't know much about Cascade Red Fox here. We certainly know a lot of fox were here in the past. We don't know, even if the one in the photo is a Cascade Red Fox, that's a genetic subspecies that some of you may have seen at Mount Rainier. They're more visible there. They're certainly still present there. We don't know what they're doing in North Cascades. We're always on the lookout, but we haven't found them yet. And so now I want to get into the real meat of this, which is the active restoration, where we're actually having to lend a hand to nature. There's the two big species we've been working on are fisher and grizzly bear. So I'll go through fisher first because there's some good updates there, and it kind of serves as maybe a mental blueprint on how we think about grizzly bear restoration. So fishers were wiped out certainly by the 1930s. We did an environmental assessment in 2015. That's sort of the maybe less controversial type topic, smaller part of the NEPA Act that we do for things like a restoration, so environmental assessment. The grizzly bear environmental impact statement is sort of like the next level up of that because it's a much bigger, much more controversial thing. So we did the EA for fishers in 2015, and then we got fishers on the ground in Mount Rainier from 2015 to 2017, and then North Cascades from 2018 to 2020. And another cool piece of this is during that whole process, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service set up conservation agreements with private landowners that totaled almost 3.5 million acres. And so those were agreements that said, hey, if fishers get uplisted on the Endangered Species Act, we just put them all back, and that's going to create new rules. But if you want to sign up to do good things for fishers now, you can kind of be grandfathered in because you're already taking those steps and those efforts. And we had a lot of landowners work with us, and when we had fisher telemetry points on private lands, on timber production lands, we give them a call and they let us go check it out, and they protect those sites. And it's a great model to sort of work through this when we've got animals that come and go from public land. We had a few objectives in moving fishers down. Grizzly bears will look a little different than this. Fishers are a totally different beast with different biology. But our objectives were to move about 80 fishers or more from Canada into the North Cascades over 2 years. And at least half of those needed to be females. And we based those numbers off of a bunch of modeling that said, how many do we need on the ground in order to be viable if only half of them survived, which is a pretty low bar, but you want to sort of be very conservative. And so 80 was a good number. Like, it was a very high probability they could establish even if only half of them made it. And we know and we hope many more than half would make it, but that was a good sort of target to aim for. We wanted to release fishers at just a few locations, lessons learned from the Olympics and even from out near, that if we let them go sort of near each other, they were where other fishers were on the landscape. They were much more likely sort of find each other and sort themselves out rather than not knowing where they were and having to cover long distances to find other fishers. So as close together as we could within reason, and as many before January 1st as we could. And so again, the biology of fishers is such that they start breeding in February. We wanted to get them on the ground well before that so they could figure out where they want to live and then get to the business of making babies, which is what we wanted them to do. And then after that, like, monitor them and actually know what happened. You know, what kind of survival rate did they have? Did they establish home ranges? Did they actually reproduce? And so those were our main objectives. Here's how we did. We got 81 fishers down in the south. That's Mount Rainier and Gifford Pinchot National Forest. We got 89 in the north. So North Cascades, Mount Baker Snoqualmie Forest. There's 170 fishers on the ground. With no small effort, no small effort at all. But we got there. And thankfully in 2020, we released the last fisher before everything shut down for COVID. So we didn't get derailed by that one. It's a big collaborative effort to do restoration. Certainly grizzly bears will look exactly the same, where everybody has to be at the table, stakeholders of all sorts, tribes, First Nations, universities, NGOs, like, everybody needs to be at the table. We're all part of the ecosystem. We all have to do this together if we want to succeed. So amazing partnerships, amazing veterinarians, amazing everybody really pulled this thing off. So we got all the fishers on the ground. In North Cascades, we had to go more than 2 or 3 release locations because they were just coming from Canada so fast. Good problem to have, but still something we had to sort out. We got 74% of them on the ground before January 1, which was really, really good. And then we monitored. We looked for survival, reproduction, home range, everything. The transmitters lasted for 2 years. And so we had real data for 2 years, as much as we could find them. They're not easy to find, even when they have a transmitter going. And now we're in the phase where we don't know where they are, other than we occasionally get trail camera photos. We've gotten some Ring doorbell camera photos from private citizens. They're still out there. We're still getting sightings of them, which is always really exciting. The biggest, sort of watershed moment, I think, and this was Luna, when my unbiased favorite fisher out there. She had 4 kits down near Lake Wenatchee in 2021. These are some trail camera photos of her moving her kits from one den to another. And that was the first confirmed reproduction we had, which was one of our goals, was to make sure we confirmed reproduction. And we did twice at Mount Rainier, and we did once up here as well. And it's not easy to find a fisher den and then get a camera out there and then hope you actually get them on the camera. It's a tall order to know that for sure they reproduced by visual evidence. But Luna did it, and 4 is the highest litter number recorded for the west coast of North America. So she's doing it in good fashion. She probably had kits the year before, or hopefully has had kits since. And we just got a photo from somebody near Lake Wenatchee with a fisher on their camera, and don't know if it was her or one of her offspring, but she's doing what she's supposed to do. So we're really excited to see that. And here's what it looks like. The locations, all those dots on the map. So the North Cascades, the yellow boundaries are the recovery area where we sort of targeted for them, and we expect they're going to spread out and eventually connect. But you can see lots of fisher locations down around Mount Rainier, just south of Mount Rainier, and then lots of fisher locations just sort of southwest of the park in North Cascades. And they're spreading out and they're doing their thing, and they're making their way. And it's pretty exciting to think that, that map was completely empty in 2015 when we started, and now we're seeing fishers moving around. So it looks successful at this stage. Now, whether they persist long-term and they do what they need to do, we have to wait and see. And so that's where we are now. Did they establish? We don't know what happened to them. I always talk about these as the kids we dropped off at school and never picked up, and like just the nervous parent about what happened to them. And so right now we have a whole grid out in the South Cascades, Mount Rainier, and around Gifford Pinchot, with about 107 camera stations in a grid. Those will run this winter. We'll pick those up, and those also have hair snag brushes, so that if anybody does happen to crawl up and look at the camera station lure site and they leave a hair or two, we can genotype those and find out who it is. And if it's somebody we released and they survived, that's great. It's even more exciting if it's the offspring of two animals we released. And in the Olympics, they did a similar project, and they got third generation, so that's exciting. So the North Cascades, we're toying with the grid right now, but it's probably going to look something like that map on the screen, which is an awful lot of places to go out in the woods and try to get cameras set up for the winter. It's probably going to be between 150 and 170 stations, and we'll get at it probably as early as August this year, and they'll run all winter. So it's going to be a big project, but we're really excited to see what we learn about fishers and where they are, and maybe who's even reproduced out there. And then it brings us to the big one, which is grizzly bears, and similar blueprint to fishers conceptually. Again, here's the map from 1995 to present even. We've looked a lot of places, a lot of different studies, hair snag studies, camera station studies, lots of hikers out there. We get reports every year of bears that might be a grizzly, and then we investigate those. And as of yet, we have not confirmed a grizzly bear anytime in recent history. There have been 2 confirmed sightings over on the other side of the border near Manning Park in the last decade. And that picture at the bottom of the screen is the last confirmed record we have, 2015, at Manning Park. The last sighting in the US was actually in 1996. And then the last female with the young down near Lake Chelan was in 1991. So they have largely disappeared, and it's taken decades and decades and decades because grizzly bears live a very long time and have an extremely low reproductive rate, tied with muskox, and North America is the slowest reproducing land mammal. And so, you have an animal that could live up to 30 years. If they get whittled down to just a few and they don't find each other, they could live, a couple decades, and you might get a record here and there, but there's nobody reproducing. They're just they were extirpated long before they really disappeared. And that's probably what happened with grizzly bears. And so now we've got this landscape, big habitat, nobody there. We get lots of questions about why don't they just come down from Canada? This is what the Canadian side of the world looks like in grizzly bear terms. All those are grizzly bear or bear management units in Canada. North Cascades, of course, is the big polygon there, sort of in the lower center. But if you look at the green, that's where Canada, British Columbia considers to be viable grizzly bear populations. And you see that big arm kind of pointing down to the lower right, and that's pointing at Glacier National Park, the North Continental Divide ecosystem. They at least have a feeder population where bears can get there. And that's good. The pink is completely gone, extirpated. And then, so you look north of us, like where are we connected? And we're kind of, there's, right immediately north of the North Cascades ecosystem, they're in the same boat with no bears really. And then you kind of get in a little bit, the Lillooet up there, the South Chilcotin, where there's a few bears, but for them to get to us, they would still have to get through Metro Vancouver and the Fraser River and railroads, and actually the road density in British Columbia, just north of the border, like backcountry roads, like logging roads and such, is extremely high, and bears don't do well with that. So we've given them decades now, and they haven't been able to get here. And so that's where we're stuck. That's where we're not seeing them naturally recover. We've done some deep dives into the history of bears here. We've also done some deep dives into climate change implications, because we know that restoring an animal right now is not putting an animal back to where they were a century ago. It's a different ecosystem. It continues to change, and it will continue to change with climate change. So we've done a couple deep dives into bear foods and what are all those scenarios playing out as we think about putting grizzly bears back here. If you want to dig into those and read, you can go to the irma.nps.gov site, which is the database for all the park reports. You can just click on North Cascades and search grizzly bears, and these will pop right up. We've done some more quantitative modeling around grizzly bear habitat here. What's going to happen 50 to 100 years out based on, we just 20 different climate models, a couple different circulation models are sort of the worst case and best case climate change models with dynamic vegetation models. We've worked it all out. Interestingly enough, across all the models and all the time periods, the best grizzly bear habitat improves, which was really surprising to us. Some of the worst habitat decreases, the best habitat increases, but the net is an increase. And so what we see is that in current conditions right now, we think carrying capacity, it's about 139 females, but double that because you kind of assume a 50% ratio. So somewhere between 250, 300 bears is probably carrying capacity given our current conditions. But the future conditions are going to go up. And you know, females alone, the best model, the most plausible home range size, all those metrics we look at, an individual based model, there's reproduction and survival and the whole thing. The carrying capacity should go up. And there's lots of reasons for that, even with fire and all these things that are a little bit scary. Fire does tend to create good grizzly bear habitat. It opens canopies. And then the first thing that moves in are things like vaccinium and cow parsnip and horsetail and things that bears love to eat. So it's sort of a net gain for them between the ups and downs. And we're lucky that grizzly bears are generalists. They don't specialize in one microhabitat or one food. They actually can eat a lot of things and cover a lot of ground. So we think the baseline density right now, the complex, the ecosystem could support about 17 bears per 1,000 square kilometers, and we think that it's going to go up to like 20 to 22 bears per square kilometer. So that's optimistic, and that gives us at least a scientific foundation to say, should we put bears back here? And really it says, yes, the habitat's here. We still have all the protections in place from the original designation of the recovery zone. We have a no net loss of core area, which means we're not putting in new roads or anything like that. We're doing all the things that would protect this as a grizzly bear habitat. And now we've got some data that says climate change is not going to be hopefully that bad for them. So the EIS, some of you may remember back in 2017, we released a draft plan. We had well over 100 meetings, over 140,000 public comments. We were well on our way to getting a plan in place, and then it was just terminated by the last administration. And that's the nature of politics and the ups and downs of people changing office. And so it just got tabled, it got set aside. There was not a decision made to not do it, but there was not a decision made on how to do it. So it just stopped until now. And there's some new things on the table. And I think we're actually in an even better place than we were then. And so we released a notice of intent for this new EIS back in November. There was a 30-day public comment period. We got a little over 6,000 public comments on the scoping. And the scoping is sort of just a really broad, here's what we're thinking of doing, no details yet. But the point was to evaluate approaches on how to restore grizzly bears. Something new is that our partners on the other side of the border, the Okanagan Nation Alliance, Beastry Ministry of Environment, are currently developing their own plan to restore bears on the Canadian side. So if it's something that could be done in sync, or certainly with lots of communication, that bodes much better for regional recovery. And so that's an exciting development that they're actually, Canada's ready to do the same thing. We're going to analyze a bunch of different ways to do this. We haven't defined them yet. They all involve moving bears into the ecosystem, except for this no action alternative. And so there's sort of the no action, which is doing what we're doing, hoping they will come. It doesn't mean doing nothing. But then there's action alternatives, and they all involve moving bears to get toward a self-sustaining population. So regardless if we do it slow or faster, we put bears over here or put bears over there, how it works out, they all have the same kind of plan for capture and transport release. The grizzly bear recovery team for Fish and Wildlife Service has been catching grizzly bears for a long time. They're really good at it. This is sort of the thing that's the analog to the Fisher project. Like we know how to catch and move them. That's not too hard. Obviously, bumping up our education and outreach, people need to learn how to interact with grizzly bears, how to be safe in the backcountry, all those things. Setting up the guidelines for management actions to prevent conflicts. We're working on a much more comprehensive park coexistence plan now for all species. And so that'll be sure to have more details about grizzly bears in there. And then importantly, there's a replacement sort of clause or idea, meaning that if a bear gets hit by a car or someone shoots a bear or whatever happens and we lose somebody, that we can replace them. It's not just a put a few bears here and hope for the best. It's a make sure you can stay with critical mass. And so those are sort of common ideas behind this. Through the EIS, we're going to look at a bunch of topics, how putting grizzly bears back would impact things. Certainly the bears themselves are impacted. Other fish and wildlife, wilderness character, visitor use, recreation, experience, as well as safety, of course, socioeconomics, that's everything from tourism to, livestock production and apple orchards and everything that could be impacted. Ethnographic resources, that's cultural importance of grizzly bears. Certainly all the tribes and First Nations have different ideas and different histories and stories and beliefs around grizzly bears. Those are all important. And areas are immediately around the ecosystem. So we're going to analyze all those topics for each of the alternatives before we come up with our draft. Something else new this time around is Fish and Wildlife Service is doing this parallel tract of what's called a 10J experimental population. Basically right now, the grizzly bears here, if there were any, or the one that might be out there, are considered threatened under the Endangered Species Act, which really limits what you can do if a bear shows up in your yard or something, whatever happens that brings that bear into conflict with people. There's certain things you can and can't do. There's always defensive life and property, but there's a lot more nuances under the Endangered Species Act. If these animals that we're reintroducing were categorized as 10J, that means they're experimental. And that was done for California condors and black-footed ferrets and several other species, and it's been really successful. But what it means is that we get to craft a new set of rules under the ESA, and that by we, I mean the stakeholders. That means everybody gets to weigh in. There'll be public comments on that as well, and basically set up a new set of rules on, if a bear goes into Seattle, can we move it back? Or what does that mean? What does that mean to have these animals put on the ground? And create this new set of rules that sort of makes it more flexible for management, but still protects the animals under the ESA. So that's a parallel thing with the EIS. The comment periods will be the same period. They'll all be released together. And hopefully that helps more people that are sort of on the fence wrap their brain around it and feel like they have a say and can get on board and find that space where we can all live with bears. That's the hope. Here's where we are in the process. So we finished the initial public scoping notice of intent, the public comment period. We're now in the winter development of alternatives. So we're crafting that document right now, working on that daily almost. And hopefully by, I'd say, May to June, we'll be able to release that for public comment along with the 10J proposed rule. And there'll be this summer will be public comment periods. We don't know how long or exactly how that'll work yet. It's probably going to be like a 60-day thing with some live meeting, in-person public meetings, some virtual meetings. That we'll get all that defined here in the next month or two. But that'll go out on the street and we'll all have discussions about that. And then next winter, we're going to take all that information we get back from public comments and talk with collaborative partners and everybody else, and draft a final EIS and a proposed final 10J rule. Like this is what we want to do. That availability notice will go out next spring, and then hopefully by late spring or early summer of next year, we will get decisions. And that record of decisions usually signed at like a regional director level, who makes a decision about what we're going to do. But that's where we are in the process, and it's we're pretty optimistic at this point. I think having Canada on board, doing their thing, having the 10J rule, and then having this EIS plan, we're in a good shape now where everybody can weigh in and we can, I think, have a regional effort to restore grizzly bears. So here's where we are in the bigger picture. Wolves are doing well, coming back on their own. We're cautiously optimistic about lynx. Wolverine seem to be doing really well. And Fisher, we're more than cautiously optimistic. We're straight up optimistic about Fisher. But we'll know more once we get some data on reproduction and distribution and all that. Cascade Red Fox is going to be a mystery as long as we look for him. We're doing bog lemming surveys last summer and this summer again. Hopefully we'll find some. And then we're on track for grizzly bears. So we're going to see if we can come up with a plan to actually get grizzly bears back. And then lastly, I just want to point out that all the stuff we do is not in isolation at all. The Park Service is not just an island doing its thing. This is just the folks that we work with in the wildlife program on various projects and interconnectedness, and everybody from Washington's National Park Fund across the board to other agencies, tribes, universities, you name it. Amazing partners. We couldn't do it without everybody, but it's been successful. So we're going to keep working at it. And I think with that, we've about reached our time, and I'm going to leave it to questions and turn it back to Teresa.
Thank you so much. That was amazing. I know I learned a ton, and I am so impressed and in awe of the scope and complexity of the work that you and your team do. That it's hats off to you. We do have some great questions that have come in. Folks, if you haven't had a chance to submit your question yet, now is your time. Please go ahead and take advantage of the chat box. We're going to go ahead and start with a question on learning more on how, for the grizzly bears, you're going to locate the candidates for relocation, and thoughts, if any, this phase of the project, on where specifically in the park they might be introduced.
Great questions. We did talk about this some during the last EIS drafting effort, so we've certainly thought about it. We haven't defined all that quite yet for this round. Certainly some moving parts to all of it. The things that we know for sure is that we're only really considering bears from a similar food economy. So these are interior type grizzly bears. These are not like the fat bears that eat salmon. These are bears that have like a 90% plant-based diet. And so we're talking about like the North Continental Divide, Glacier National Park area. Those are very similar food economy type bears as we would expect here. They also happen to have a booming population around in and around that area, so that they could actually afford to send somewhere else. There's also some places in interior British Columbia that meet the same sort of threshold of what type of bear that is. But specifically, it narrows down even farther than that, because we would really want to move very young bears. So those, a few years old, they've just left their parents, they're trying to figure out where they want to live, and we have a place to offer them. That's much easier than old bears who already know where they want to live, and it's not here. So we're looking at those younger bears, and also bears that don't have any history with people. We're not interested in bears that have gotten into conflicts and campgrounds and issues in other places and bringing them here. That's off the table. So that narrows it down. And so it's going to be working really closely with biologists at the source populations to say, where do you have, young dispersing bears? And then let's figure out how to actually move them from point A to point B. The second part of that, where we're going to actually release them, we're still trying to define that, but it's going to be far away from people. These are really remote areas, and we expect that if we move 3 to 5 bears a year for several years to sort of get up to a founding group of about 25 bears, we're going to put those in really remote places, and chances are people just aren't going to see them for quite a long time. So stay tuned. The draft EIS will have that specified. We'll have some maps that say here's what we're thinking of, ground zero to put bears.
Thank you. Appreciate that. That's a lot to sort out.
It is.
We've got another great one on tap. Thank you to the submitter of this question. The question is, when a species like the fishers disappear, can you measure what impact that has on the environment? And similarly, what is the positive impact that you expect to happen to the environment when grizzly bears are reintroduced, and or I suppose fishers too, in context of this question?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's sort of this, I think, mistaken belief that when an animal disappears, there's this hole in the ecosystem, in the ecological space that just stays there, that just persists through time. And that's not true, because ecosystems continue to change. And in the case like North Cascades, we see black bears in places doing things occasionally that we would think is more grizzly bear turf. Like, we see them up in the alpine, being kind of weird. They're not being forest bears as we expect. And it's probably because they have that ecological space. There's no grizzly bears up there, so they're just kind of figuring out what they want to do. And so that fabric keeps changing through time, whether it's fishers or grizzly bears, or anything else. And so when we talk about putting them back, we know that we're not putting them back in the same place. It's not the same ecosystem. It's not the same dynamics. We know kind of what a grizzly bear does. We know they're really good on turning over soil and aerating the soil, and that disturbed soil allows certain plant species to colonize up in the alpine. That's a really specific role of things they do. We know they disperse seeds up and down elevations, much more than other species do. So there's things we know grizzly bears do, and we think they'll do those again. But it doesn't mean that the fact that they're not here right now means that nothing's happening. And so, there's still avalanche chutes that turn soils over in the alpine, and that creates that little window. We expect grizzly bears will re-find their place in that mix, and they'll probably displace a few black bears that are up in the alpine and decide that's not where they want to be anymore. There's going to be some readjustment to having this, long lost neighbor move back. Same with fishers. We have martins that show up at different elevations, and they're probably resorting themselves now that fishers are back in the mix. Fishers also disperse seeds, but they eat a lot of the same things that martins do. So there's definitely some competition, but the overarching piece of this is trying to restore biodiversity. And we say this a lot, but the more characters you have in the play, the more likely the play is going to go on, even if you lose some through time. And climate change is going to have winners and losers. And there's going to be species that get in trouble and disappear. But if you have the full cast, then you're much more likely to have a resilient ecosystem. So getting these things back buys us that flexibility.
Excellent. That makes perfect sense. And thank you so much for that wonderful, detailed response. I'm excited to see how that plays out. That's fantastic. We got time for one more question. We've got so many good ones on tap. I wish we had more time. There's one more pertaining to Highway 20 and animal movement. The question is, are you able to document State Route 20 road crossings by Wolverine, lynx, wolves, and others? And does it seem to pose any issues to the animals now or into the future?
Another great question. Certainly been on our mind a lot. And we've certainly looked at things like roadkill data where we know that animals have gotten struck by vehicles. There's not a lot that we have data on. We've worked with WSDOT on that as well. We certainly have some areas where we keep our eyes on that seem like natural movement areas where you've got sort of topography funneling down toward the road. And those are certainly areas that we're thinking about and looking at. There's not a clear corridor anywhere or a place that we've just had like a highway of animals going through. So we're trying to gather more data, I think, on that. We are talking about that in terms of the new relicense with Seattle City Light for the hydro relicensing and what their role in protecting wildlife is. So it's a conversation about crossing areas and on Highway 20 and whether there's technology we can use, like motion detecting signs that light up and say animal approaching road. Those are pretty effective in some parts of the country, much less expensive than an overpass like on I-90. So there's different options, but there are some studies going on right now. We have a study going on with WSDOT right now, looking at use along Highway 20 in specific, and especially where it closes in the wintertime, and to see how animals use the road when there's no cars on it. And so we can learn a few things there. And so definitely data coming in. We're thinking about it, learning about it. And always looking for ways to better coexistence, which means if there's places people need to slow down or stop or whatever, then we need to identify them and give animals that chance. So great question.
Thank you so much for a wonderful, informative conversation. I wish we had all the time in the world to keep it going, but we are at time for today. Thank you to everyone here that attended. Appreciate each and every one of you for joining us for another amazing virtual field trip with our parks team. And if you'd like to keep it going, I'd like to invite you to join us on our next virtual field trip coming up on February 15th. We'll be joined by team members from the search and rescue operations across all 3 of our Washington National Parks to learn more about their activities, how they're supported, and what makes them go. And you can learn more about that, as you've learned about this one, at wnpf.org/field-trips. And you'll also find a link there to our YouTube channel to see a wealth of previous field trips and learn a ton more about the important work and amazing activities that are happening within our national parks. And thank you again, certainly, most importantly, to Jason today. So appreciate your time, your expertise, and your enthusiasm to share with us this important project. And we look forward to speaking with you more in the future and watching this go. Thank you so much, and look forward to seeing all of you on the next field trip to come.